Hello, health champions. Today we're going to talk about the top 10 signs that you're eating too much fat. And it's really, really important you understand these 10 signs because most people don't get enough fat. Now, it is very possible to eat too much also, which we are going to talk about. But in fact, the first 4 signs we're going to talk about are false, and yet they are the ones that you hear the most often. So number 10 is that eating too much fat would cause weight gain, and that is false. Eating too much fat would cause insulin resistance, and that is also false. And the reason most people buy into the idea that fat causes weight gain is that fat has a lot of calories. It's very calorie dense. And that's why we store energy as fat, because it's the most calorie dense. It's an effective way to store, but it's not the fat that causes the storage. It is a hormone called insulin. Insulin is the fat storing hormone, but fat does not trigger insulin. When you eat fat, you burn the fat. When you eat carbohydrates, now you trigger blood sugar, which is going to have to be stored somehow because we can't keep high blood sugar. It has to get out of the bloodstream into the cell. We can store a little bit as carbohydrate, but the rest gets stored as fat. So it's the insulin that's storing the fat, but most of that fat stored comes from carbohydrates because fat in itself does not trigger insulin. So fat does not cause fat storage unless we eat the really bad combination of high carbohydrates and high fat, because now we get the insulin from the high carbs, we get a bunch of extra calories from fat, and now because of the high insulin, we're going to store both. And that obviously is going to cause weight gain. But there's one more problem, and that's of overeating. And where does that come from? Because insulin resistance, high levels of insulin, causes increased lipogenesis, meaning making fat from other things. And that's primarily carbohydrate, of course. But high insulin levels also prevent lipolysis, which is the breaking down of fat. So now what happens when you have high insulin levels, the tendency is for you to store more and burn less. So now when between meals, what's going to happen if your insulin is high, you get more hungry. It is more difficult to go longer without food when your insulin is high. And therefore, insulin resistance makes you hungry and will cause you to eat more food, and that causes weight gain. So it's the carbohydrates and the insulin resistance that causes weight gain, and it's the carbs that cause the insulin resistance, not the fat. Sign number 8 says that after eating a lot of fat, you get tired after eating it. That is also false. And in fact, what causes you to be tired is just eating too much food, a combination of fat, protein, and carbohydrates, also known as the Thanksgiving syndrome, which I'm sure all of you have experienced. And here's another myth. Very often we hear that what makes you tired at Thanksgiving is the turkey, that the turkey contains tryptophan, and the body uses tryptophan to make the sleepy hormone melatonin. Because you have so much tryptophan, that what makes you tired. That is false. What makes you tired again is eating an enormous amount of food and a combination of high carbs and high fat that is now going to trigger a lot of blood sugar and a lot of insulin. And now what happens when insulin is high and blood glucose is high, now your cells become insulin resistant and you have to do something else with all that blood sugar. And if the cells don't want the blood sugar because you're insulin resistant, now the body, one more way the body can get rid of it is to turn it into triglycerides, which is known as blood fat. And this all places a huge burden. First, you're trying to break down all that food, which is hard work. because you overloaded the body and it uses a lot of energy to break down food. But now you have to use extra energy to convert that glucose into triglyceride. Hence, you become tired after eating, but it's not the fat and it's not the turkey. It's the amount of food and the fact that you include a bunch of carbohydrate. It's not the turkey, it's the turkey with the stuffing and the gravy and the pecan pie. And what's going to happen is also the more insulin resistant you are, the worse this problem gets. And you don't even have to eat an enormous amount of food or a Thanksgiving dinner. You're going to notice a lot of times after eating, you become tired. And number 7 is another misconception that the primary organ affected by eating too much fat is the heart, because we heard so many times that high-fat diets cause heart disease. But again, it is not the fat that's doing it. That's false. It is the carbohydrates and the insulin resistance that results from eating carbs over a long period of time. It is not the amount of fat that causes any problem. Unless, of course, like we said, you eat the fat together with carbs. So if you eat high carbs, high fat, that's a really bad combination because the carbs will trigger insulin. The insulin will store all the excess. And when you eat carbs together with fat, you tend to eat way more food altogether. But what does matter about eating fat is the quality of the fat. And we have over and over been told to eat the wrong kinds of fat. So vegetable oil is not the healthy thing. First of all, there's no such thing as vegetable oil because they don't squeeze the oil from vegetables. It's not from lettuce or arugula or broccoli that they make the oil. They make it from other things, and they have to process it very harshly. That makes it toxic. So that's not an oil that you should consume, these commercial so-called vegetable oils. What you want to consume is natural, saturated, stable fats. So the stable fats are monounsaturated, like in olive oil, or saturated, like in animal fats. If you eat those unspoiled, then you can eat large amounts of fat and not develop any heart disease as long as you don't combine it with carbohydrates and insulin resistance. And the best way to reduce insulin resistance is to cut back on the carbs and increase the fats. And we're going to talk some more about that. So the 4 things that we just covered are false, which brings us to the ones that are actually true. And there we're going to start with the number 1 organ affected by eating too much fat is in fact the gallbladder, because the gallbladder is the primary thing that processes fat first. So the first actual sign of eating too much fat could be diarrhea. And the reason is that if your gallbladder has some trouble, and the point here is that it's not the fat really causing it, but if your gallbladder is already bad, if it already has some problems, if it can't release enough bile, now if you eat a lot of fat, now you can't break it down. You can't emulsify that fat because the gallbladder releases bile, which is like a detergent to the fat. It breaks up the fat particles so that you can use fat enzymes called lipase to digest it and absorb it. And if you can't do that properly, now the body has no choice but to flush it out. And if your gallbladder is really low in activity and you eat a ton of fat, now your body is pretty much just going to flush it out. And sign number 5 is floating stool. So that means you go to the bathroom and then as you look at the results, you see that it floats. So why would it do that? Well, if you don't have the bile to break down the fat, or you don't have the enzyme lipase, if your pancreas is not super healthy, then you also can't break down the fat. It may not be as bad as the previous case with the diarrhea, but if you're incomplete in breaking down the fat, now you also can't absorb it. So any unabsorbed fat is still going to be there. And the fact that fat is lighter than water means that the stool is going to float. So if it does that, that means that you may be eating too much fat, at least for your ability to break it down. Another problem that can happen is burping and bloating, more so burping and indigestion, discomfort. And that would happen again because the gallbladder is not working. If you don't release enough bile, now that fat that you're eating doesn't get properly emulsified. It's like we don't have that detergent to break it down. Now the fat droplets are too large and start creating problems. Sign number 3 is shoulder pain, and it's going to be on the right-hand side because the gallbladder is on the right side under the liver. And there's a referral pain pattern. Most organs have a pain pattern of referral, and gallbladder happens to have it on the right side of the shoulder. So if you look at a person from behind, then we have the arms here and we have the shoulder blades. And the pain pattern is going to be all the way up into the neck. It's going to be all the way across the upper trapezius, and it's also going to go down to the intrascapular, between the shoulder blades and around the shoulder blade area. So anything in this area could be a gallbladder problem. So a lot of shoulder pain actually happens to be gallbladder problems. Sign number 2 is pain in the gallbladder area. And now it's the actual gallbladder that's hurting. And the pain would be on the right-hand side under the liver, right where your rib cage starts at the bottom. And what's causing this pain is that the gallbladder is congested, it's sludgy, it's full of thick stuff that doesn't flow properly. It could be stones in there, but it doesn't have to be. And when this gets bad enough, then it can start hurting, and it could even cause you to vomit anytime that you eat something. And if it gets really bad and you go to the emergency room and you point to your gallbladder and you say that you're throwing up and it really hurts, now they're going to perform a cholecystectomy. They're going to remove your gallbladder. And in some cases, it is necessary to remove it, but in most cases, you can heal the gallbladder again. So if you have severe pain and you throw up when you eat, another solution, rather than taking the gallbladder out immediately, is don't eat. And that's a novel concept for a lot of people. They don't understand that it is possible to not eat, but it is called fasting, intermittent fasting, or somewhat extended fasting. And if it happens to be imposed or forced onto you by a gallbladder attack, then that's not such a bad thing. It just means that you get some involuntary fasting. But if it doesn't kill you to fast a little bit, then it's not going to kill you to not eat when the cause is the gallbladder either. But in addition to not eating and giving your gallbladder a rest, you also want to help it clean out a little bit. And some products that can be very good is Colaplex from Standard Process, KDIR from Systemic Formulas, which is more of a stone-breaking formula, but it can also help cleanse and release some pressure on the gallbladder. And another one is GB Tone, a gallbladder tone from Energetics. And they can be very helpful if you have a severe attack, or if you're just even starting to experience some discomfort, or if you notice some of these signs and symptoms after you eat, then it is a good thing to start working on that before it gets really, really serious. And I'll put some links down below where you can get them if you want to give it a try. And the number one sign that you're probably going to be interested in is if you eat too much fat, you may stop weight loss. And a lot of people know that you can get on a ketogenic diet and start burning fat by eating more fat. But it's not eating more fat, it's eating less carbohydrate. And if you cut the carbs way back, now your insulin starts coming down and you actually have access to the body stores and you can start burning body fat. That's the whole point of a low carb or a ketogenic diet. And once you get into ketosis, you can measure that with blood sticks then you know that you're burning fat. In ketosis, your body is primarily getting energy from fat. But here's what's really important to understand when you start keto, that there's certain amounts of carbohydrate, fat, and protein that you're supposed to eat. So let's say that you're eating 2,500 calories in the beginning. Now, at first, you don't want to try to restrict the total amount of food that you eat. You're trying to get fat adapted. So if you eat 30 grams of net carbs, you eat about 100 grams of protein, and then you eat the rest fat, you eat until you're full to get into ketosis and get your body burning fat, then you're going to be at about 2,500 calories. And if we calculate the percentages of calories coming from these different macros, then we get 5% of calories from carbs, 16% from protein, and the rest 79% from fat. So that would be a high-fat, low-carb, moderate protein diet. And if you do that for even just a few days or a week or so, now you're going to get fat adapted. Your body is going to learn how to get its energy from primarily fat, and that's the whole point. You want to teach your body that, and now your insulin starts coming down. But here's where a lot of people get into trouble, because even if you're in ketosis, which proves that you're burning fat, if you're eating this much fat, the body may not burn any fat off the body. All the fat you're burning to get into ketosis might come from dietary fat, which is why you're not losing weight. So what you want to do after you've done this initial phase, now you want to start cutting back on fat so that your body can burn it off the body instead, because that's the whole point. So now you probably want to keep your carbs about the same. You eat leafy greens and non-starchy vegetables. You keep your proteins about the same, but let's say that you cut back on your fat by 100 grams. So now you're eating 120 grams of fat. Now your macros that you're ingesting are actually going to change. So these are kind of the classic macros, 5-15-80 or 5-16-79. Those are classic keto macros. But now that you cut back on the dietary fat, you're going to stay in ketosis because you're eating the same amount of carbs and protein, but the percentages in the macros change. So now those 30 grams become 8%. The 100 grams of protein becomes 25% because you're eating fewer calories overall. And now the fat gets down to 68% of your calories. And if you add all that up, that's about 1,600 calories. So now you're down from 2,500 to 1,600. But if you've done this right and you maintain a moderate amount of activity and you stay fat adapted, what happens most of the time is you're still perfectly full and your body is still burning 2,500 calories even though you're just eating 1,600, which is the whole point. Because now you created an incentive for the body to burn the fat off the body. So now you're still burning the same amount of fat, but only 120 grams comes from the diet and 100 grams comes from the body. So these are not exact numbers. These are examples. You're going to have to modify these based on activity level, based on body size, based on results, etc. But you don't want to starve yourself. You want to become fat adapted first so that your body can start using body fat for energy. If you enjoyed this video, you're going to love that one. And if you truly want to master health by understanding how the body really works, make sure you subscribe, hit that bell, and turn on all the notifications so you never miss a life-saving video.